Hey everyone, it's Ashley. Welcome back to the Trinity Stamps YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be creating a watercolor galaxy card, and I have a lot of fun doing these watercolor galaxies. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I really love improving upon them and creating them. I'm going to be using Trinity Stamps Season's Greeting Silhouette stamp set as my main image. I'm also going to be using some different size round brushes. I'm using this Winsor & Newton watercolor palette paint set. And then I'm also going to be using this Academy watercolor Prussian blue tube watercolor. And I'm also using gouache, which I think I'm saying that right. It's just a very pigmented and a little bit thicker white paint. To begin, I'm going to tape down my watercolor cardstock to a board. And this will allow, first of all, a border around the edges so it looks a little bit more classy, I guess, and framed. I'm doing this with painter's tape, and I first stick the painter's tape onto my pants and then pull it off just to get a lower tack. I'm going to spread some clean water all around the watercolor cardstock, and this is so that when I apply my watercolor to the cardstock, it will have a wet on wet look. So it's a little more feathery and it sort of blends out and plays a little bit more. To begin, I am using a turquoise color and sort of just placing that and dabbing it onto the wet watercolor cardstock. And then I'm just sort of like swooshing it around just to make sure I have a nice base layer of this nice light turquoise. I'm then going to go ahead and add some violet, and then also a pink color, which I took actually from a pan from my Gansai Tambi watercolor palette, because this specific one from Winsor & Newton doesn't have a really bright pink in it. If I ever want to make sure that I'm blending it well or using a lighter color, I can just go in and add some clean water to the pigment on the watercolor cardstock. I'm going to go ahead with the Prussian blue and add some water to that. And this is a really nice deep blue color, and this will be really like my night sky look. So I'm putting that mostly on the edges and the corners, the top two corners. And then I'm applying some water, some clean water around it to help it blend, and then going in again with that turquoise color just to make sure it all blends really well together. Before I add my stars, I need to dry my watercolor. If I put the gouache on top of the watercolor when it's wet, it will kind of sink in and it won't be as vibrant. So I want to make sure I definitely dry that first. I put my gouache into my watercolor pan, and I'm going to take a little bit of water on a number 1 paintbrush, and then I'm going to create these stars. Basically, I just do like a cross and then some other tiny little lines coming off of that just to make it look like a twinkling star. To add the other stars, I'm going to take a slightly larger round brush and put a lot of gouache in there and make sure that I have it nice and heavy on the brush, and then I'll take a completely clean and dry brush and tap it against my watercolor brush that has the gouache on it, and this will create a splatter and make it look like lots of stars are there. I'm going to go ahead and again and dry this because now I'm going to do some stamping. First, I need to remove my tape, and the best way to do this I have found is to pull it back onto itself. Jennifer McGuire suggest this method a few times, and I've tried it and it's always worked for me. If you pull it back onto itself, it seems to rip the paper a lot less, if at all. I had a tiny bit of tearing, but it was really only like the first layer, so I wasn't too worried about it. I'm now going to do my stamping, and I'm using my Misty for this because I know that I want a really dark stamp. I want it to look like a silhouette, and I know that I'm going to need to stamp it a few times and get a few impressions out of it. Because I want that frame to stay and I want it to be white, I'm just going to go ahead and place tape right where those lines are in the Misty itself. That way I don't get any images stamped in that frame. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink to do this stamping. I actually got this in a goodie bag from Creativation when I went to one of the Simon Says Stamp events, and I've really been loving using it. It's very dark, it's very intense black, as it were, and I have really been enjoying using this for any of the dark impressions that I need to get. And this is a new pad, so this is very juicy, and it's working really well for my impressions here. I'm using trees at different heights to get a more organic look. And then I'm going to go ahead and peel that tape off. And I want a deer in the image as well, but I do want it to stand out a bit. So I'm going to take some blackjack ink from Catherine Pooler, and I'm stamping this 2 times over itself so that it's still a very dark color, but a bit lighter than the rest of the trees. I'm then going to go ahead and fussy cut this silhouette out, and I have to be careful because it's really delicate. I need to make sure that I don't chop its leg off or an antler or something like that. And then I'm going to take the moon image from the stamp set and I'm going to heat emboss it right onto my scene. So I prep my cardstock with an anti-static powder bag, and then I use Versamark ink and a fine white embossing powder to emboss the moon image directly onto that top left-hand portion of my scene. I'm going to adhere that deer silhouette with some small strips of foam tape, and then I am done. I did add a sentiment, which is never change who you are, and this is from the You Can Do It stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I embossed that on black cardstock with white superfine embossing powder and adhered it right there in the center of the card. I really love how this turned out, and watercolor paper can sometimes be tough to use for a card because it does warp quite a bit, but I used a lot of foam tape on the back to adhere it to an A2 size card base, and all of the warping disappeared. It's nice and straight and sturdy now, and I don't have to worry about it at all. I also use some of my favorite clear iridescent gems from Trinity stamps, and I just sort of place them randomly around the card to look or to give a little sparkle to the card. As always, all of the links to the products are in the description, as well as my personal YouTube channel and blog. And I thank you very much for stopping by today. I will see you again very soon. Thank you. Bye.